On the day of my wedding, I wasn't just a bride, I was bait. My name is Stephanie Hale. For my entire life, I was the support beam for my family, the one who was expected to sacrifice everything. So when they saw my greatest achievement, the historic clock tower residence, they didn't see my triumph. They saw their new home. They thought they could steal it from me right under my nose while I was saying I do. They thought I would just let them. But they had no idea that this time I had a new blueprint and all the cameras were rolling. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The night of my wedding, I wasn't just a bride. I was a trap perfectly set. My mother and sister were the targets, and the bait. It was the home I had built and the life I had earned. They were coming to take it. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have imagined as they sipped their champagne and judged the flower arrangements, was that I was going to let them. In fact, I was counting on it. My name is Stephanie Hale, and this wasn't a wedding. It was a reckoning. By trade, I'm a historical restoration architect. It's my job to find the beauty in what's broken, to see the strength in old, forgotten foundations. I believe that any structure, no matter how dilapidated, can be saved if its bones are good. This philosophy, this need to find and fortify the load-bearing walls, wasn't just a career. It was a trauma response. For 29 years, I had been the support beam for my family, the strong one. A title that sounds like a compliment, but is in fact a life sentence. It's a job description that means you are expected to bear any load, absorb any impact, and never ever show a crack. In the Hale family, we had a core concept, a kind of sick financial religion preached by my mother Margaret. She called it the family pot. It was a lovely sounding euphemism. What's good for one is good for all. She'd say, her smile as polished and cold as marble. In practice, it was a one-way street, a funnel. The unwritten law of our house was, what's Stephanie's is Claire's. My younger sister Claire was the fragile one, the golden child whose endless manufactured dramas required constant, expensive solutions. I was the rock. Claire was the endless tide of chaos that broke against me. And my mother was the moon pulling that tide, directing its erosion. The erosion, the day the blueprint of my life was irrevocably altered, happened when I was 20. I call it the primal wound. I had saved $24,000. It had taken me 3 years working 40-hour weeks as a waitress, a draft tech, and a late-night inventory clerk, all while carrying a full course load. It was my certificate fund, a sacred, untouchable pile of my own blood and sweat. It was my one chance, my escape route, a prestigious summer restoration program in Italy that would have defined my career. I made the mistake of telling my mother. I was proud. I wanted her to see what I had built. She'd smiled that same vacant, polished smile and told me I was so responsible. A week later, the money was gone. All of it. Claire, after a tough breakup with a guy she'd dated for 6 weeks, was emotionally devastated. My $24,000 had been, as my mother put it, reallocated for Claire's 6-month emotional wellness retreat in Bali. I confronted my mother in the kitchen, the bank statement shaking in my hand. She didn't even look up from her Sudoku. "Don't be dramatic, Stephanie," she said, her voice a bored, tinkling sound. "It's just money. Your sister needed this. We're a family." She finally looked at me, her eyes flat, devoid of any warmth. "You're strong. You'll make more." That was the day the old Stephanie died. That was the day I stopped being a daughter and started being an architect, one who builds walls. I met Liam Kincaid on a job site. He's a structural engineer, a man who understands stress points and foundations in a way that's almost telepathic. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I felt seen. Not as a function, not as a support beam, but as a person. He saw my lines, my boundaries, my carefully constructed defenses, and instead of trying to tear them down, he simply helped me fortify them. His family, the Kincaids, were the antithesis of the Hales. They were pillars of the community, wealthy, yes, but philanthropic in a way that was genuine. They valued integrity, hard work, and earned success. They didn't have a family pot. They had individual respect. 18 months ago, the Kincaid Family Trust announced a national competition to restore the city's historic Merchants Exchange, a crumbling clock tower that was the heart of our skyline. I poured everything I had into the proposal's sleepless weeks of drafting and research, and I won. They didn't hire me. I won. The contract was a testament to my vision, and it included a massive bonus. But the real prize, the core of my compensation, was the deed to the magnificent private residence in the building's newly restored clock tower. It was not a gift. It was not a wedding present. It was my achievement, signed and notarized, earned with a decade of skill I'd had to fight to build. Now the project is finished. The clock tower residence is a masterpiece of glass steel and 150-year-old oak, and it is mine. My wedding to Liam is in 2 weeks. My family, who has been strangely quiet, is coming to town. Liam and I are standing in the center of the vast, empty living room, the city lights glittering like a galaxy below us. He takes my hand. His is always warm, solid. "Are you ready for this?" he asks. I nod, but a cold, familiar knot tightens in my stomach, the old dread of an impending family emergency. Liam squeezes my hand, his gaze firm, reading the doubt in my eyes. "The building is secure, Steph," he says, his voice quiet. "The question is, are we—" They arrive 2 days later, not with suitcases, but with an entourage of expectations. The performance began the moment the elevator doors opened into the foyer. My mother, Margaret, stepped out, her eyes sweeping the 30-foot ceilings and the expanse of restored 19th-century glass. She didn't see the work. She didn't see the hours of structural calculations or the painstaking restoration of the original crown molding. She saw a balance sheet. "Oh, Stephanie," she breathed, placing a perfectly manicured hand over her heart. Her voice was pitched for a matinee. "This is, well, it's just so much for you." She glided into the main room, her heels clicking on the reclaimed oak. "You are just the luckiest girl in the world. The Kincaids are just so generous to give this to you." A cold, sharp prickle went down my spine. I felt Liam's hand instinctively find mine. "They didn't give it to me, Mom," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I won the commission. It was part of my contract." Margaret waved my words away with a tinkling, dismissive laugh, as if I'd just made a childish joke. "Oh, don't be difficult, dear. We all know how these things work." She turned to Liam's mother, who was watching with a polite, unreadable smile. "It's a wedding present. It's simply wonderful." She was in one perfectly executed social maneuver, attempting to strip me of my greatest professional achievement, reframing my work as charity. She was erasing my agency. Claire, my sister, was not even that subtle. As Margaret held court, Claire simply wandered. Her eyes were wide, not with wonder but with a disturbing, acquisitive gleam. She ran her hands along the Italian marble of the kitchen island, a faint, bored pout on her lips. She didn't say, "It's beautiful." She just walked into the master bedroom, looked out at the skyline, and said, "I can't believe you get to live here." She touched everything, the faucets, the velvet cushions, the antique brass telescope I'd restored, as if she were taking inventory, mentally claiming it all. She was a black hole of entitlement, and I could feel her event horizon pulling at the light in the room. The assault came 2 days later at my bridal luncheon. It was supposed to be a day of champagne and silly games, a brief respite before the storm of the wedding. Claire cornered me by the mimosa bar, her face a perfect, practiced mask of tragedy. "Steph," she whispered, her eyes brimming with calculated tears. I have to be honest. I don't know what to do." She bit her lip, a perfect little quiver. "My landlord, he's selling my building. He gave me 30 days. I'm going to be homeless, Steph. I have nowhere to go." It was a beautiful performance. 10 years ago, it would have shattered me. 10 years ago, I would have handed over my own apartment keys without a second thought. But I wasn't that girl anymore. The girl who'd had her dreams stolen and her savings account drained looked at her sister's crocodile tears and felt nothing. A void. A perfect, cold, structural absence of pity. "Claire," I said, my voice flat, "you'll find another place. You always do." The shift was instantaneous. It was like a light switch. The fragile mask didn't slip. It evaporated. The tears vanished and her eyes went from watery to reptilian. A flash of pure, cold anger. "God, Stephanie," she hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You always do this. You get everything and you just hoard it. You're so selfish. I'm your sister." Before I could even respond, Margaret was there, appearing as if summoned by the scent of conflict. She put a loving, forceful arm around each of us, the perfect peacemaker. "Now, girls," she said, her voice a soothing, steel-enforced coo, "let's not make a scene. Stephanie, don't be so cold. Your sister is just asking for a place to stay for a few weeks." She emphasized the words as if that were the only obstacle. "Just until she gets on her feet. This place." Her gesture encompassed the entire clock tower. "It's huge. You and Liam won't even know she's here. You'll be on your honeymoon. It's the right thing to do." The old familiar vice began to tighten on my chest. The expectation, the family pot, the assumption that my boundaries were nothing but temporary inconveniences. I looked from my mother's commanding, demanding smile to my sister's smug, victorious pout. They had me, the strong one, the support beam. They thought I would bend. They thought I would, as always, sacrifice my comfort for theirs. I extracted myself from my mother's grip. I looked at them both, the two architects of my childhood erosion. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the room with the force of a wrecking ball. The smiles vanished. "What?" Margaret whispered. "No." I repeated louder this time, my voice gaining strength from the solid new foundation I was standing on. "This is my home. This is my home. It is not a halfway house. It is not a resource. It's not part of the family pot. The answer is no." Margaret's smile didn't falter, not completely, but it became something else, something reptilian. Her eyes went dead, all the fake warmth gone, leaving only a chilling, obsessive cold. "We'll see, Stephanie," she said, her voice dangerously sweet, a silken threat. "We are family after all. We'll sort this out." That night, my mother found me alone. Liam was out checking on the venue, a flimsy excuse we'd created just for this. Margaret didn't knock on my hotel room door. She simply used her key. The sound of the lock clicking open was a perfect metaphor for her entire existence. She was an invasion. She entered not in a rage, but in a cloud of weaponized disappointment. "Stephanie," she began, her voice a low, mournful tone that had in my youth been able to make me physically ill with guilt. I have never in my life been so embarrassed, so ashamed. She paced the room, touching a lamp, a chair, as if claiming the territory before the attack. "Your sister is in pain, real genuine pain, and you were cold. You were cruel." She turned to me, her eyes narrowing. "After all I've done for you, all the sacrifices I've made to give you every opportunity, this is how you repay me, by becoming a cold, selfish hoarder." The word hoarder landed with a thud. That's what I was to her. Not a daughter, not an architect, just a dragon sitting on a pile of gold that didn't belong to me. "Mom, that's enough," I said, standing. "This isn't a discussion. The answer is no." Her face hardened, the mask of maternal concern dissolving into pure, uncut avarice. "You should let Claire live here." She snapped, her voice losing its theatrical sorrow. "In fact, it makes more sense. You'll be with Liam. You'll be starting a family. You'll want a real house in the suburbs with a yard." She was redesigning my life, liquidating my assets. "This place?" She gestured vaguely toward the city. "It's a bachelor pad. It's a phase. It's perfect for Claire. It's the right thing to do, Stephanie. It's for the family." And there it was. The mask was completely off. This wasn't a small ask. This wasn't about a few weeks on the couch. This was a full-on hostile takeover. They didn't want a room. They wanted the whole thing. They had seen my triumph, my life's work, and had immediately begun drafting the paperwork to seize it for their own. I didn't argue, I didn't cry, I just left. I walked out of the room past her sputtering, "We are not done here," and went to find my fiancé. I found Liam in the hotel bar, exactly where he said he'd be nursing a soda water. I sat down and told him everything. Every word. He listened, his face calm, his knuckles white around the glass. He's a man who respects blueprints. He respects contracts, the laws of physics, the unassailable logic of load and stress. What my mother was proposing was a violation of all of it. "So," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, the sound of a cable being pulled to its breaking point. "They think it's not yours. They think they can just take it. They think the family pot overrides a legal deed and a lifetime of work." He nodded a slow, grim finality. "Okay, they're doing it. They're really doing it." This wasn't the first time they'd tried this. It wasn't the first time my success had been viewed as a community resource. But I promised myself as I drained my own savings account to pay for the degree my certificate fund was supposed to cover that it would be the last. Because you see, Liam and I had a secret. We had our own blueprint. We'd been building it for 6 months. The moment the Kincaids announced me as the winner, Liam had taken me out to dinner. He'd raised a glass, his eyes not just happy, but analytical. "I love you," he'd said, his voice firm. "And I know your family. I know your mother. They're not going to see this as your victory. They're going to see it as their new richer pot. We need to build a firewall." Our firewall wasn't a conversation. It was a legal and technological fortress. We didn't hire a family lawyer who'd preach about reconciliation. We hired Mara, a senior partner from a corporate litigation firm who specialized in hostile takeovers. At her direction, the deed to the clock tower wasn't in my name. It was in the name of a complex, multi-layered LLC, Hale Kincaid Holdings. The bylaws of that LLC, drafted by Mara's ruthless, brilliant hand, were a work of art. They contained a hostile takeover clause. It was designed specifically for my mother. It stipulated that any attempt to claim ownership keys or residence through duress, coercion, emotional manipulation, or non-legal means would trigger massive, non-negotiable financial penalties. And those penalties weren't tied to the LLC. They were tied personally to the aggressor. My mother thought she was playing a family game. We had turned it into a corporate one, and she had no idea what the stakes were. The legal trap was only phase 1. Phase 2 was Liam's masterpiece. The clock tower wasn't just a smart home. It was a fortress restored and wired by Liam's own engineering firm. It had a state-of-the-art security system, not just a few cameras. Military-grade high-definition audio-visual recording in every common space, all tied to an off-site immutable cloud server. Every door, every window, every motion sensor was calibrated to a degree that was frankly terrifying. We could hear a whisper from 30 feet away. We could see a fingerprint in the dark. The system wasn't for burglars. I'd known that from the beginning. It was for family. At the rehearsal dinner, the trap was set. The air was electric. Margaret and Claire were huddled in a corner, whispering furiously, shooting venomous, calculating looks my way. They thought I was isolated. They thought I was beaten. I stood up, Liam's hand warm on my back, and raised my glass for a toast. Margaret's head snapped up, a predatory gleam in her eye. "I just want to thank you all," I said, my voice carrying over the room. "And I especially want to toast to family." I looked directly at my mother and my sister, a small private smile on my lips. "And to getting exactly what you deserve." Margaret smiled back, a smug, triumphant smirk. She thought it was a concession. She thought I was finally breaking. She had no idea the cage door had just snapped shut. The rehearsal dinner wasn't just a dinner, it was a statement. We held it in the grand concourse of the Merchants Exchange, the public-facing hall of the building I had spent the last 2 years of my life resurrecting. The vaulted ceilings, the polished marble floors, the intricate restored ironwork. It was my portfolio, my soul brought to life and shared with the city. Community leaders, city council members, and the heads of the historical society were all there. They didn't just shake my hand, they thanked me, their eyes filled with a genuine awe that I had never in my life received from my own family. "You saved this building, Ms. Hale," one of them said, grasping my hand. "It's a triumph." It was the first time in my life my work had been seen so completely, and it was overwhelming. The peak of the evening, the moment that sealed my fate in my mother's eyes, came with the toasts. Liam's father, Mr. Kincaid, a man of profound decency and few words, stood up. He raised his glass, his eyes finding mine across the crowded room. "We've all watched this building rise from the ashes," he said, his voice resonating with a genuine, quiet warmth that commanded the hall. But the real gift wasn't the restoration of the brick and steel, it was the restorer. He smiled, and it was a real smile, not a social weapon. "We didn't just hire a brilliant architect, we gained a daughter. Stephanie, your vision, it's a gift to the entire city." The room erupted in applause. It was the purest, most uncomplicated moment of validation I had ever known. I glanced at my own family's table. This praise, this public validation of me as an individual, not as a family asset, was like acid to them. Margaret was smiling, a grotesque rictus of social necessity, her fingers gripping the stem of her champagne flute so tightly I thought the crystal might shatter. Claire was staring at her plate, her face a thunderous mask of absolute boredom and simmering rage. I could see them seething. This public celebration of my earned success in a room full of people who respected it was an indictment of their entire worldview. They couldn't bear it. After the dinner, they insisted on dropping off the guest book at the clock tower, a flimsy pretext we had been counting on. As they bustled into the foyer, Margaret already critiquing the lighting I'd so carefully chosen, Liam and I began the second act of our performance. We stood by the main console table, speaking just loud enough to be overheard. Liam, faking frustration, pulled a heavy, antique-looking bronze key from his pocket. It was ornate, a beautiful piece of 19th century brass I'd restored myself. "Damn," he said, his voice a perfect note of mild annoyance. "I keep forgetting to put the master override key in the lockbox." I saw my mother's head, just out of the corner of my eye, tilt almost imperceptibly. Her chatter about the guest book died. "This one," Liam continued, jiggling it so it caught the light. "It's the only one that can't be remotely deactivated. For emergencies. You know, if the whole system goes down." He sighed, then, accidentally, placed it on the console table right next to the guest book they'd just set down. "I'll grab it in the morning," he said, loud enough for the whole foyer to hear. "Don't let me forget." He turned to me, his back to them, and gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible wink. As the elevator doors finally closed, sealing them inside, I felt a sudden, sickening wave of nausea. Guilt. It was sharp, acidic, and it rose in my throat. Was I going too far? Was this monstrous? To lay a trap for my own mother, my own sister? I looked at the key gleaming under the spotlight, a tiny golden serpent. I felt my resolve waver. Then I remembered. I remembered the gut-wrenching, hollow feeling of my empty bank account. I remembered the 20-year-old girl crying so hard in her rusted-out car that she couldn't breathe, realizing her entire future had been reallocated to Bali. I remembered every sacrificed dream, every holiday I'd worked, every time I'd been told, "You're strong, Stephanie, you can handle it." My nausea vanished, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. This wasn't a trap I was setting. It was a mirror I was holding up. A mirror they had polished themselves with years of my tears. They were about to show themselves exactly who they were. The key was, of course, real. It just didn't open the door to the clock tower. It didn't override any security system. It was the original 1880s key to the building's antique built-in liquor cabinet. It was a prop, but they didn't know that. They just saw a key. They just saw a way in. We didn't have to wait long. We went to our hotel, the command center, as Liam called it. My phone buzzed on the table. It wasn't a call. It was a silent, pre-programmed notification from the clock tower's security system. A stark black and white text log. Liam and I looked at it at the same time. Status decoy key. Object. removed from hall table zone. My breath hitched. They hadn't even waited an hour. They took it. The key was gone. I looked at Liam, my heart a cold, heavy drum. He met my gaze, his own face grim, resolute. It started. The morning of your wedding, you're supposed to be a nervous wreck about the flowers or the vows or whether your mascara will run. I was a nervous wreck about data packets and upload speeds, while my bridesmaids were debating the merits of champagne versus Prosecco. I was staring at my phone, not at texts from well-wishers, but at a live, secure link to the Hale Kincaid Holdings LLC server. My pulse wasn't racing with excitement. It was a cold, steady, tactical drumbeat. Then at 9:15 a.m., the grenade arrived. My phone buzzed. Not the secure app, but a regular text message, a digital invasion. It was from Margaret. The all-caps text was a symphony of manufactured panic. Claire is devastated. Locked herself in the bathroom. She says she's not coming to the wedding. You need to fix this, Stephanie. Now. I read it twice. The classic family pot emergency. It was a masterpiece of emotional extortion, a perfectly timed crisis designed to do one thing: pull me from my own life, from my own wedding day, and center the universe once again on Claire's drama. It was the certificate fund all over again, but this time the stakes were higher. My maid of honor, Anna, who had known me since I was the girl with the stolen Italy fund, saw my face. "What?" she asked, her voice low. I showed her the screen. Her eyes, normally so warm, hardened. She didn't say, "Oh, your poor sister." She didn't say, "You have to go." She put her hands on my shoulders, her gaze firm. "Liam is waiting. He's got his team. You go to yours. We've got this." This right here was my new community, my new foundation. I took a deep, steadying breath, my silk robe rustling. I typed back a simple reply to my mother. "I'm on my way." I kissed Anna on the cheek, told the bridesmaids I'd be back, and walked out of the bridal suite. I didn't go to the lobby. I didn't go to Claire's room. I took the service elevator down to the mezzanine level and walked straight into the command center, a hotel conference room Liam had booked under the name Kincaid Structural. It was like walking into a war room. Liam was there, his tuxedo jacket off, sleeves rolled up. Our lawyer Mara was in the corner in a severe dark suit, a laptop open. A young tech guy I didn't recognize was monitoring a panel, and on the far wall, a massive 80-inch screen showed a quad-split feed from the clock tower residence. It was silent, but it was live. And my family was there. Margaret and Claire were not in a hotel room. They were not crying. They were moving. They were in my living room, surrounded by packing tape and cardboard boxes. They were packing my things. "How?" I whispered, my voice sounding strange in the cool, quiet room. "The key. Did they?" Liam pointed. "Look." On the feed from the foyer camera, the heavy bronze decoy key was still on the console table, right where they'd left it, tossed aside in disgust. "It never worked," Liam said, his voice a low growl. He tapped his own laptop, and the main screen's feed was replaced by a data log. He pointed to a line of text time-stamped 9:02 a.m. Log unauthorized locksmith access. Signature C. Hale. Reason lost. Key proof of residency forged utility bill. My blood went cold. She had faked a Con Ed bill. They hadn't just stumbled into this, they had planned it. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was a premeditated, coordinated invasion scheduled to coincide with the one time I would be completely occupied. "Turn on the audio," I said, my voice flat. Liam hit a key, the room filled with the sound of my life being dismantled. We watched horrified as Claire walked into my home office. She picked up the AIA award I had won for the Merchants Exchange project, the heavy crystal obelisk. She held it for a second, her face a mask of bored contempt. "God, this is so pretentious." Her voice, clear as a bell, echoed in the conference room. "She has so many, she won't miss this one." She then tossed it into a cardboard box marked storage. My knees felt weak. Liam's hand found my back, steadying me. Then Margaret's voice, bright and chirpy. She was on the phone, walking through my kitchen. "Yes, the caterer for the..." Housewarming. On Sunday, she trilled. Just a small, intimate gathering. My daughter Claire has just moved into the clock tower. Yes, it's so exciting. I couldn't breathe. They were literally moving in. They were erasing me. They were planning a party in my home on my honeymoon to celebrate its theft. They were colonizing my life. Wait, Mara said from the corner, her voice sharp. Go to the office cam. Zoom in. Liam switched feeds. We watched Margaret open my antique desk drawer, the one I never locked, and then she found it. The bait. The final perfect piece of the trap. A single document I had planted there 2 days ago. She pulled out the fake, beautifully fabricated welcome letter, printed on heavy Kincaid Family Trust letterhead. It was a masterpiece of forgery, gifting the apartment not to me, but to the Hale family for their continued support. Margaret's face in 4K resolution bloomed with a look of pure, ecstatic triumph. We heard her gasp. Claire, Claire, come here. Claire ran in, and Margaret held the paper up her hand, shaking with victory, holding it right up to the hidden camera as if for emphasis. I knew she shrieked, her voice a triumphant crow. I knew it. It's ours. It was always ours. She has no legal right to it. It's family property. I walked down the aisle. I said I do. I kissed my husband. And with every step a single rhythmic thought repeated in my head, a cold comfort. The real is cued. The real is cued. The ceremony itself was beautiful, almost painfully so. It was held in the garden atrium of the restored exchange, the late afternoon sun slanting through the glass, illuminating the faces of people who genuinely loved us. I looked at Liam, his eyes clear and steady, and my love for him was a sharp, grounding force. But beneath the lace and the vows, I was a general. This perfect, beautiful moment was the moral high ground, and I was claiming it before the battle began. Of course my family wasn't there. My mother Margaret and my sister Claire were not in the front row. Their absence was a gaping noted hole, a deliberate stain on the day. I could hear the whispers as we walked back up the aisle. Where's the bride's family? A rumor, no doubt planted by Margaret herself, had already circulated among the distant relatives. Claire is dreadfully sick, just a terrible stomach bug. Margaret is with her. They're both just heartbroken to miss it. It was a perfect preemptive strike of martyrdom. They were already the victims. The reception began in the grand concourse, the same hall where my family's rage had solidified. The space was transformed warm, now filled with music, laughter, and the scent of peonies. We danced, we ate, we smiled. We were for 2 beautiful hours a normal, happy couple. Then came the speeches. Liam's father, Mr. Kincaid, stood up, his voice full of a quiet, powerful emotion that commanded the room. He spoke of community, of legacy. A life, like a building, is only as good as its foundation, he said, raising his glass to Liam and me. And Stephanie, you have shown us all what it means to build on a foundation of integrity, strength, and vision. We are so proud to call you our daughter. The applause was deafening. It was a perfect, unassailable validation. And it was time. The MC, a college friend of ours, stepped up, his voice bright. And now we have a very special surprise. The bride and groom have a message. As planned, the lights dimmed, plunging the hall into a dramatic twilight. The 3 massive video screens above the dance floor, which had been cycling through photos of us as children, flickered and went black. I felt a cold, electric wave of adrenaline. I walked to the podium and took the microphone from the MC. My hand was steady. My heart was a cold, precise drum. Thank you all for coming, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the vast, suddenly silent room. Liam and I are so blessed to be surrounded by so much love. I paused, letting the weight of the word hang in the air. But some people couldn't be here. My mother and sister, they're preoccupied. I saw confusion ripple through the crowd. They're in the middle of a very important move. I wanted to share a little video. A tribute, if you will. A tribute to the family pot that got me here. I turned to the tech booth. Roll the reel. The screens lit up. Not with a photo, but with the cold black and white data line location clock tower residence. Time 11:04 a.m. during the wedding ceremony. A single collective gasp went through the room. The first clip played, "The foyer of my home," the locksmith looking nervous, and Claire, my sister, handing him a piece of paper. The high-fidelity audio we'd paid so much for was crystal clear. We heard her voice sharp and annoyed. "Just hurry, she'll be at the church by now." The room stopped breathing. The sound of 200 people's shock is a vacuum. The screen split. The next clip, my office. Claire picking up my AIA award. "God, this is so pretentious." Her voice dripped with contempt. "She has so many. She won't miss this one." The entire room watched her toss it, my life's work, into a cardboard box labeled storage. I heard Liam's mother let out a small, horrified, "Oh my God." The third clip, my mother on the phone walking through my kitchen, her voice bright and chirpy. "Yes, the caterer for the housewarming on Sunday. Just a small, intimate gathering. My daughter Claire has just moved into the clock tower. Yes, it's so exciting." People were standing up now, their faces masks of pale, horrified disbelief. This wasn't a joke. This was a home invasion. Then the kicker, the final clip. Margaret in my office finding the planted letter. Her shriek of triumph was obscene, an animal sound. She held the fake Kincaid letterhead up to the light, her face contorted in victory, holding it right up to the hidden camera as if for emphasis. "I knew it!" Her voice, my mother's voice, screamed, filling the reception hall. "It's ours. It was always ours. She has no legal right to it. It's family property." The screens froze on her face, a mask of pure, triumphant greed. The room was profoundly silent. The horror was absolute. I saw Mr. Kincaid's face. It was no longer warm. It was a mask of cold, righteous fury. And in that perfect, pressurized, pin-drop silence, the main doors of the reception hall burst open. In walked Margaret and Claire. They had changed from their packing clothes. They were in designer party dresses, hair and makeup flawless, beaming with social grace. "Stephanie, we're here," Margaret called out, her voice bright and false. "Claire's feeling so much better, we wouldn't miss it for the world." They walked into the room smiling, expecting applause for their grand, magnanimous entrance. And then, they froze. They looked at the silent, horrified crowd. They looked at me at the podium. And then they looked up. They looked up at the 3 20-foot screens, each one displaying a high-definition frozen image of Margaret's own face caught mid-crime, her hand holding the evidence, her mouth open in a triumphant yell. The silence was no longer silent. It was a weapon. It was the sound of a cage door snapping shut. There are two kinds of silence. There is the silence of peace, the soft, quiet calm after a storm. And then there is the silence of a bomb, just before it detonates, a pressurized, airless void where all sound goes to die. This was the second. My mother's painted-on smile didn't just fade. It caved in, collapsing into a grotesque mask of pure reptilian rage. Her face, a moment ago so full of false warmth, contorted. It was a transformation so complete it was terrifying. "What is this?" she hissed, her voice a low, venomous vibration that barely sounded human. She took a step forward, her eyes locked on me. You recorded us," she shrieked, the sound tearing through the hall. "In our own home." Her audacity was breathtaking. Even now, exposed, her first instinct was to claim ownership. I kept my hand on the microphone, my voice by contrast amplified, calm and cold as ice. "It's not your home, Mom." The entire room heard it. Every guest, every server, every Kincaid. "It's mine. And yes, I recorded you. It's called a security system." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just listed the facts. A security system that recorded you calling a locksmith under false pretenses. That recorded you forging a utility bill to gain entry. That recorded you packing my possessions, my awards into boxes. My mother sputtered, her hands clenching and unclenching. She was cornered, a predator caught in a snare, and it was making her reckless. It was a misunderstanding, she screamed, her eyes wild, searching the crowd for an ally, for anyone who would believe her. We were helping. She's so disorganized. We were just tidying. That letter. Her eyes lit up, finding her defense. That letter. The Kincaids gave it to us. It's family property. Tell them, Stephanie. Tell them it was a gift. She had just sealed her own fate. A new voice, quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute authority, cut through her tirade. Margaret. The entire room, a sea of horrified faces, turned. Liam's father, Mr. Kincaid, was standing at his table. He hadn't moved, he hadn't shouted. He just stood. That letter, he said, his voice a calm, level instrument of pure fact, is a fabrication. My family's only contract, the only one that has ever existed, was with Stephanie Hale. A contract she earned with her own talent and hard work. He looked at her, not with anger, but with a cold, devastating disappointment. What you have done tonight is not a misunderstanding. It is called fraud. It is called trespassing. And it is called theft. My mother staggered as if he had physically struck her. But the 1-2 punch was just beginning. From a table near the back, our lawyer Mara stood up. She was no longer a guest. She was legal counsel. She walked forward, her heels clicking with a terrifying metronomic purpose on the marble floor. She was holding a thick, file-bound document. She didn't hand it to my mother. She placed it on the table in front of her, a final, definitive judgment. Mrs. Haley, Mara said, her voice crisp and clear. You've been served. My mother just stared at the document as if it were a snake. That, Mara continued, gesturing to the file, is a civil complaint. It formally activates the hostile takeover clause in the Hale Kincaid Holdings LLC's bylaws. A clause, I might add, you triggered the moment you used a forged document to enter the property. Mara gave a thin, cold smile. The financial penalties are frankly ruinous. It includes damages for the locksmith, the forged documents, the cost of this entire investigation, and punitive damages for emotional distress. We have your recorded confession. This was no longer a family spat. This was a public execution. The guests, who had been frozen in shock, now reacted. They weren't whispering. They were shunning. People I had known my whole life, distant aunts and cousins who had always enabled my mother's behavior, were visibly turning their backs. The social annihilation was instant and absolute. It was this, not the video, that finally broke my sister. Claire had been standing behind my mother, a pale, silent ghost. Now the reality of the word ruinous seemed to hit her. She finally understood this wasn't a game. This wasn't just Stephanie being selfish. This was real. She grabbed my mother's arm, her face a mask of dawning childish terror. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Mom, what did you do? You told me. You said it was ours." She didn't collapse. She just deflated. The golden child, the fragile princess, all the air went out of her, leaving a small, pathetic, hollowed-out woman. "And one more thing," Mara added, her voice cutting through Claire's whimper. She held up her phone. "The locksmith you hired this morning. He's a good man. When my associate contacted him an hour ago, he was horrified to learn he'd been used to commit a crime. He has already given a sworn videotaped statement to the police to clear himself of any liability." Mara paused, letting the final stone drop. "They are waiting outside in the lobby, Mrs. Hale. They have a few questions for you and your daughter about fraudulent inducement and forgery." The word police was the final nail. The main doors of the hall opened, not with a bang, but a quiet official swing. 2 uniformed police officers entered, their presence a stark, brutal fact. They didn't run. They simply walked, their expressions impassive, flanking Mara as she pointed. They didn't cuff them, not here. It was a quiet, devastatingly professional escort. "This is insane," Margaret sputtered, but her voice was thin. "She's a liar. It's a misunderstanding." But she was walking. They were moving her toward the door. Claire just dissolved, stumbling, her face buried in her hands, a deep, ugly sobbing that had no performance in it, only pure, unadulterated self-pity. The doors of the grand concourse swung shut behind them, cutting off the sound. The room was silent again. The bomb had gone off. And there in the wreckage I stood. I was shaking, the adrenaline finally fading, leaving me lightheaded. But I was standing. I was free. After the explosion, the first thing you have to do is check the foundations. The grand oak doors of the concourse clicked shut, and the silence that rushed in to replace my family's chaos was absolute. It was a vacuum, heavy and pressurized. 200 pairs of eyes were on me. The party was dead. The wedding a smoking crater. I stood there, shaking, the adrenaline of the fight draining away, leaving me feeling hollow and terrifyingly exposed. I looked at Liam. He wasn't horrified. He wasn't looking at the door. He was looking at me, and he was smiling. It was a slow, proud, brilliant smile. He walked to me at the podium, took the microphone from my trembling hand, and wrapped his other arm around my waist, pulling me against him, a solid, warm anchor. After an explosion, he whispered, his voice for me alone. The first thing you have to do is check the foundations. He squeezed me, a silent structural affirmation. And ours, Mrs. Kincaid, is solid rock. The party wasn't over. It was just stunned. But it wasn't a mob of strangers. It was my community. And they began to move. Liam's parents were the first. Mr. Kincaid walked right up to me, his eyes not filled with pity, but with a fierce, protective pride. "Stephanie," he said, his voice rough with emotion, placing his hands on my shoulders. "Welcome to the family, truly. My maid of honor." Anna appeared at my elbow as if by magic, 2 glasses of champagne in her hands. She passed one to me, her eyes dancing with a wild, giddy light. "Well," she said, raising her glass, "that's one way to clean house." I laughed. It was a real, rusty, startled sound that was torn from my throat. The tension, the horror, it all broke. Liam, still holding me, turned and took the mic. "Well," he said, his voice booming with a newfound joy, "that was unexpected." A few nervous, scattered laughs answered him. He looked back at me, his eyes full of a love so profound it almost buckled my knees. "But my wife, Stephanie Hale, is the strongest, most brilliant, and most resilient person I have ever known. She built this hall, she built this life, and she earned this party." He turned to the terrified DJ who was peeking out from behind his console like a gopher. "DJ," Liam yelled. "Hit it something with a backbone." A second of silence and then... thump. The opening defiant bass line of Survivor didn't just play, it detonated in the room. It was a battle cry. Liam grinned, a wide, joyous, unburdened expression, and pulled me onto the center of the vast, empty dance floor. And we danced. Just us, for one bright, shining moment, 2 figures in the middle of the beautiful reclaimed space. Then Anna and the bridesmaids flooded the floor. Then the Kincaids, Mr. Kincaid spinning his wife. Then in a joyous, laughing, cheering wave, our community, our friends, our people rushed the floor surrounding us, dancing with us, celebrating not just a wedding, but a victory. It was a celebration of resilience, of freedom. It was, for the first time in my life, a celebration of me. A few days later, the confetti was gone, the guests were home, and the world was quiet. Liam and I stood in the clock tower residence. It was silent, but it was a new kind of silence. It was peace. The cardboard boxes were gone. Mara, in an act of beautiful clinical efficiency, had arranged for a moving company to clear them out, sending every last piece of my mother's invasion to a storage unit. The bill Mara had assured me in an email had been sent directly to Margaret, along with the first invoice for the civil penalties. We were just living. I was making coffee, the scent of it filling the air. Liam was reading the paper, his feet up. I stood at the massive 30-foot arched window, the one my sister had looked through with such acquisitive envy, and I just breathed. I looked down at the city, my city, and I realized with a sudden sharp clarity that it was never about the apartment. It was never about the square footage, the marble, or the view. It was about my life, my personhood, my right to have something to earn, something that wasn't immediately seen as a community resource to be plundered. The family pot was a lie. It wasn't a pot, it was a cage, a set of invisible toxic rules designed to keep me small, to keep me tethered, to ensure my strength was only ever used to service their weakness. I used to be the support beam. The one everyone leaned on, the one who was expected to hold the entire crumbling structure up, even as they chipped away at my own foundation. I'm still a restorer. I still believe in good bones and saving what's worth saving. But now I'm building my own foundation, and the walls are high, the locks are strong, the blueprints are mine, and they are non-negotiable. I've learned the hard, painful way that the only people you let inside are the ones who respect the design. Liam came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. We looked out at the city, our city glittering below us. I was home. I was finally, truly home. My phone resting on the granite counter buzzed, a faint, annoying, familiar sound. I glanced over. A blocked number. My mother. Or Claire. Or some lawyer she'd conned into representing her. 10 years ago, that buzz would have sent a jolt of pure, agonizing dread through my body. My stomach would have clenched. My day would have been ruined. I looked at the buzzing phone. Then I looked at the skyline. Then I looked at my husband's hand covering mine. My hand was steady. I reached over and just silenced it. I didn't pick it up. I didn't block it. I just pressed the button, cutting off the noise. I turned back to the window, leaning back into Liam's embrace. The phone buzzed again fruitlessly, and then it stopped. I closed my eyes, taking in the scent of coffee and the feeling of his arms. The silence that followed was perfect. I was at last free. And with that, Stephanie Hale finally closed a painful chapter at last, able to breathe in the home she had truly earned. What did you think of the clock tower trap? Let us know in the comments. We read every single comment of your thoughts. If you love stories of boundaries and justice, be sure to subscribe. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.